Okay, a chorde cahéirlik as chorde an gidal sias gur mínama a gaibh goléir as tachtan sa hanocht don dispóireacht fíortábhachtach seo tá sé anabhag bhfuil an eirichin daoine ansá. Thank you so much for coming. I think it's very, very positive that we have a very large attendance here tonight for what is a very, very important debate. And I would like to thank my fellow speakers here, Carol, with whom we have shared platforms before, and I'd like to thank especially Tom Clonan and Rory Quinn for agreeing to participate in this debate, so that hopefully the ideas in regard to the Lisbon Treaty can be teased out to a greater extent, and we hope further clarification can be achieved as a result of that, by virtue of outlining the views and the vision and the analysis of people on different sides of the argument with regard to the Lisbon Treaty. Now, just about 1 hour from now, in 7 days' time, the polls will be closing on the referendum on this treaty. It is very, very important, in our view, that for the future direction of this country and for the future of working people generally within Europe and indeed without Europe, that the Lisbon Treaty is defeated. Because the Lisbon Treaty is not about tidying up a few loose edges here and there. It is proposing very serious changes into the future, in the way the European Union is organised, and therefore in the way its business is conducted, with serious implications for ordinary people the length and breadth of Europe. Now, I just will have to hone in on a few key points really that we have been raising, the Socialist Party has been raising in the course of this debate. There are many other arguments, but I certainly don't have the time to introduce them tonight. I will just add briefly with regard to the military aspects, which I think Carl covered very, very well from an opposition point of view, but referring to that and to some of the points that Tom Clonan made as well. You see, there is an important consideration here as to how you view the European Union, what it is, what does it represent. And in the last months, in the course of this debate, government speakers and people on the yes side generally have been portraying a picture of the European Union as being everything that is good and noble in humanity. So inoffensive it is, so generous, etc., it might be a cuddly toy, rather than the reality of the situation. It is a giant capitalist economy with nearly 500 million people within its borders, dominated by major multinational corporations which are household names: Siemens, Nestle, Royal Dutch Shell, Heineken, Tesco, you name them. Massively powerful organisations which really write much of the economic policy of the European Union, which was the central point in many ways with regard to the European Union over the past decades, and whose interests are really pushed forward by the political elite and the bureaucracy of the European Union. And the foreign policy of the European Union represents what it says in the treaty: strategic interests. What are the strategic interests of the European Union with regard to foreign policy but markets for those companies, places where they can get their raw materials from, and the influence that they can put on countries outside the European Union to enable them to trade, to sell their goods, to take in raw materials, and to make super profits in the process. And therefore, when we talk about the strategic interests of the European Union, you have to keep those interests in mind, because just like the United States, that is really what is at stake here. Now, the United States is also a massive capitalist economy. Its constitution is full of high-minded ideals, as are the various declarations and proclamations of its Congress, its Senate, its leaders, etc. However, over the last 50 years, they have supported virtually every vile dictator in Latin America, suppressed democracy, crushed human rights through those dictatorships. For what? To support and facilitate the major American corporations that were operating in Latin America and elsewhere. And for that reason, had no hesitation in launching military action and using their armed forces to guarantee those strategic interests. Now, in my view, the European Union is facing itself in that direction. Not in the direction of peace and humanitarianism, of course, which is always the cover for military action. But if you take the Petersburg tasks, Tom referred to them, joint disarmament operations, military advice and assistance. Do you remember that from the early 1960s? That was what the United States was providing in Vietnam before the disaster that came following that initial period. Combat forces in crisis management. What does that mean? All these are a cover for the possibility in the future of military action. Now, the permanent and undoubtedly, it's undoubtedly the case, notwithstanding what Tom says, it is quite clear that member states shall undertake progressively to improve their military capabilities. And then Carl said it, the European Defence Agency, which is a coordinator for the armaments industry, is mandated here. And the states are mandated to push forward research, development and technology of the armaments industry. What does that mean? More spending on arms, more weapons of mass destruction, for what? And of course, the European armaments industry is one of the better kept secrets. You don't hear leaders going on about it for a very good reason. The European armaments industry creates 50 to 60 billion euros a year, weapons of mass destruction. What do they do with them? Their governments and their spokespeople are over in countries like Pakistan and India, flogging billions of euros worth of armaments to countries where people starve, to protect the elites of those countries, not in the interests of the masses. And it's quite categorical. In the Lisbon Treaty, that project is pushed forward by reference to the European Defence Agency. And it is shameful, in my view, that an Irish government or any Irish people or any people whatsoever should have anything to do with underwriting or pushing forward the armaments industry. What an obscenity, where thousands of the best minds, scientists, technicians, tens of thousands of industrial workers engaged in nothing but designing and creating horrific weapons. Yes, we do welcome the fact that cluster bombs, that barbarity could be phased out. But cluster bombs are just one little part of an array of destructive weapons that wreak horror on so many people, as we've seen year after year. So therefore we should give no support to the armaments industry and no support to the European Defence Agency whatsoever.